Considered by the board, and we anticipate that Windy Gap loan. That's a negative number. I will say, don't worry, we've got it under control. On the severance tax side, same approach. A reminder that we have about $15 million in principal and interest that comes in. Our initial estimate of about $44 million starting. The June projection from severance tax is currently, or was in June, and the next projection comes in September 20th. So is that today? Actually today that we'll get a new projection. That $36 million, I am not a big fan of relying on the severance tax projection, but in this case we are paying close attention to what that number is, because we are, I will say, stressing the accounts, pushing the envelope in how much is reserved for projects and how much we have available for new projects. And so we start off with about 44 million. We're going to add 15 and 36, and there's always about $3 million in reversals, leaving me about 100 million to start the year. We've already approved $8 million in July, and this board meeting we're looking at another $29 million in new loans if the board approves it. Also identified that we had conversations yesterday about the Chatfield impact on the loan funds. The numbers that I am using that are about 30,000 feet right now are somewhere between 10 and $30 million in additional loan funds needed for those borrowers. It could be less, it could be more. My guess is somewhere between there at the $20 million range. And so I lined that up at the next board meeting. So really the big issue when you add all these new loans up, I typically tell the board we've got $40 to $50 million in loan funds available. When I add those up, that's 50 there, and the other spreadsheet shows about another 13, and that's why we're pushing the envelope on our funds available for new loans. I'm still showing that I have available about $9 million for the rest of the board meetings. And if we continue down, we still have the $25 million worth of transfers from severance tax over to the construction fund for water plan funding, the Chatfield operation and maintenance, plus the ownership need that is anticipated, similar to the loans. My best guess is about $7 million for that. That runs us down to about where we are expecting to be at the end of the year, and that would be zero funds unreserved. Again, understanding that having them reserved by the board just sets it aside, doesn't necessarily mean that the money disappears. It's just dedicated to a project, and some of those projects are several years out. So that's why we have a little bit of a buffer zone to work with, timing-wise. So if there aren't any questions, I'll let the loan presenters begin.
Any questions for Kirk? I don't believe so. Thank you.
I would remind or let the board know that Anna headed to France Sunday, Friday, a couple days from now, and so if you could ask your questions in French, you know, test her out. So. Jonathan, okay. Hold your French question.
You can ask me in French, but I won't answer. Except a shrug, maybe.
All right, at this time, if there are no questions for Kirk, let's move to agenda item number 14. There's A and B, and this begins our trek down with a lot of action items this afternoon.
All right, thank you. Jonathan Hernandez, CWCB staff, for the record, presenting agenda item 14A. It's an action item. It's a loan request and a WSRF grant request to the Fruitland Irrigation Canal. The project is located near Crawford in the Gunnison Basin. They're seeking a loan of about $1.7 million and a grant, total grant of about $900,000, split $750 statewide, $150 Gunnison Basin. President of the Fruitland Irrigation Company, and he is in the audience, as well as Beth Carber. She's representative for the Colorado Department of Agriculture, the salinity program field coordinator, as there's a lot of salinity control money that is being sought from by the Bureau. And they are both available to answer questions. Fruitland Irrigation Company, they're established in 1901. They have 200,000 shares and 130 shareholders. You can kind of see on this map here, they're located just south of Crawford. They divert off of the Crystal Creek here. They have two individual canals. This orange canal is the Highline Canal, and the yellow is the Gould Canal. And the project they're looking at is addressing seepage issues on the Gould Canal that's downstream of the reservoir. A 2002 water management plan showed that they are seeing on average about 12.5 CFS. On a year, that's 1,856 acre feet that is being lost. This area is within the salinity control basin, and so the impacts of that is about 6,000 tons of salt being put into the Colorado River Basin, 484 pounds of selenium. And because of that component, they are seeking grant funding from Bureau of Reclamation of $7.79 million to help with the total project cost. And that award date will be about January 2018 is when they expect to hear they've been approved for that award. The first section between the Gould Reservoir and the tunnel is piping this section. You can see their canal here. This is a part of their ditch which is very hard to access. And it's steep slopes, and they get a lot of rockfall in this area. And so they looked at lining this to mitigate the seepage, but it turned out for them that piping this section was just better for a maintenance point of view. When I was out there with Danny, it had rained about a week prior, and he was pointing out a couple of new spots on the concrete where different rocks fell down even in the last week. So this is an area where they routinely have to come out and fix up the ditch section. So piping it through here is their preferred alternative. And this will save, the estimate was 486 tons on section 1. And this part of the project is continuing that pipe, but through the tunnel. These are 100-year-old tunnels. There's some structural concerns to this tunnel and also the seepage concerns. So they will continue this pipe through the tunnels. There's actually 2 tunnels, 1 and 2, right adjacent to each other. That's about 305 tons of salt boom. The last section is, well, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this section, there wasn't the need to pipe the ditch. So they're looking at lining the ditch for this section. It's going to be about 62 tons of salt loading that will be reduced by lining this section of the ditch. The funding summary, there's a lot of different funds that this whole project is looking at. It is over a $10 million project as a whole, and that's quite substantial for the irrigation company to handle. So as I mentioned, they're getting or seeking a grant for $7.79 million from Reclamation. They might also get a $50,000 grant from the Colorado River District. And then as well the WSRF statewide and basin request for $900,000. The balance of that will be the loan for $1.729 million. You heard this project earlier in the day for the water plan grant. Because the timing of the approvals, what they did with the loan was just add that difference of the water plan grant to the loan. That way, if worst case scenario and they are denied in November, they can still move forward with this project using additional loan funds. If this project is approved in November for the water plan grant, it will ultimately reduce the amount of loan that they have to take. So again, the whole project is about $10.5 million. With the loan, looking at that part specifically, you can see the loan amount with the service fee. They're getting a 2% ag rate. That is because they're seeking a 40-year term. So we increased it from 1.75 to 2%. And that comes out to an annual loan obligation of $70,000 roughly. And so their assessments currently are 50 cents a share. To take on this debt, it'll have to be raised to about 85 cents per share. And the ratios do indicate that they're a strong borrower. The collateral, we usually take the project itself for collateral. In this case, it's hard to take tunnels and 10 miles of ditch lining. And so we have looked at seeking interest in the Gould Reservoir. Loan from us to fix some of the Gould Reservoir outlet. And with that loan, we had a 50%, undivided 50% interest. They paid that loan off at the end of August. And as well, they will be paying the assessment revenues. And there is a condition on staff recommendation for this approval to be conditional upon them getting the Bureau of Reclamation grant, just because that's a very substantial grant. Without the 7.8 from the Bureau, they cannot do the project as described. So they may have to look at smaller projects, maybe separating it up over multiple years. So the project as described for this loan and grant will be conditioned on the Bureau of Reclamation grant. And with that, I will ask the board if you have any questions of me or Dan or that.
Questions for Jonathan at this point? Director Goebel.
Thank you. I just had a question. In Arkansas basin, if you have a ditch that's not lined and you line it, you have to augment that water that went back to the river before. Is there any rules or is there any augmentation requirement?
I believe that's specific to the Arkansas because of your compact, and so there's not similar rules in the Gunnison Basin. That I've heard of.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions for Jonathan? Mr. Todd, would you like to address the board at this point in time?
I'm Danny Todd. I'm a lifelong rancher from the Crawford area. My family homesteaded in the area. We worked on, my family ancestors were instrumental in working on the tunnels and the ditch system for the Fruitland Irrigation Company. So I have a lot of heart here in this project, I guess to say, so we do appreciate your ability to help us with our project. So thank you, board. Greatly appreciate it.
Any questions for Mr. Todd? Thank you very much for making the trip, Walter. Very much appreciated. Director McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there are no further questions from the board, I would move staff recommendation subject to the condition in the memo.
Motion by Director McLeod, second by Director Gallagher.
I will point out there are two
Further discussion.
recommendations, one for the loan, one for the grant. So I'm not sure if they have to be approved separately.
I intended to include both of those in my motion. Is that okay?
As long as everybody on the board is clear that this is, we're moving both things at the same time. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, call for the vote. All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Let's move to 14B, Port Alliance Canal Fund.
CWC finance section. This is 14B, the Fort Wayne Canal Company Adobe Creek Dam Rehabilitation. It's a loan grant request. It project will restore a little over 32,000 acre feet of water in the Arkansas Basin. I want to first thank Sarah Dunn from the audience here. She's the attorney for the company, and Steve Jamison is the engineer with the Associates for this particular project. So I appreciate them taking time out of their schedules to come to Walden today. As I mentioned this morning briefly when we were talking about the water plan grants, Fort Wayne Canal Company does have an intent to apply for enlargement on Adobe Creek, but this grant loan requests are for the rehabilitation of the outlet works and addressing seepage of the dam. So it's $9.2 million, 8.1 of which is the loan request, 1.1 million is the grant. That's $1 million statewide and 100,000 from the Arkansas Basin. You've probably seen this slide before, something similar. The Fort Wayne Canal Company is one of the largest irrigation companies in the Arkansas Basin. There's about 93,000 acres irrigated under the system. That's all shown in green here. So it's spread across a large area. It's going to be hard to see what's all on there. But Adobe Creek Reservoir is nearly due north of the town of Los Animas. 1870, storage behind it is roughly 82,000 acre feet. And in March of 2016, they observed some piping conditions, and that got everyone's attention for the outlet works. And so they did do some excavation. They installed the drain pipe. When they were doing that work, they found that there was larger seepage issues at the dam. So that's what prompted this project. So they did a little bit of this work in 2016. That's where some of the seepage was happening to piping. You can see a little bit more of the scale of that with the engineer in the picture there. This is the outlet works looking on that date. They went in and installed a drain pipe to help control that so they didn't lose control of the outlet work. And for break fix, and that's what it looked like after completion. So again, this will replace the outlet works, the control structures there, and then put a new tow ring in. And so they're hoping to do design work over this winter and then bid the fall next summer and construct this year, not fall 2018. On the funding side, it's the loan grant I mentioned, though, some of the grant benefits, that's the reason why the roundtable supported it. One, it helps the metro budget of the water plan of keeping storage. That's 32,000 acre feet. There's also a state wildlife habitat area around Adobe Creek Reservoir as well. So I guess the details on the loan side of things, we've got a 2% interest rate. They did a 40-year term for this, stretching out the debt over a little bit larger period. So we started off 1.75, took off or added 0.25% rather because of the 40-year term, and then subtracted 0.5% because it is restricted by the dam safety branch. So the annual payments will be around $275,000 a year. The company's done a great job of increasing their assessments over recent years. They've got about 275 shareholders, and so they started increasing assessments in 2014. So it appears with this project, they won't have to increase any assessments. They do have one loan with us for First Creek Flume that closed out about a year ago, and that one is in good standing. And on this one, the collateral will be our standard pitch company collateral, the federal assessment revenues, and the project itself, which we'll describe as the outlet works at the dam. So with that, I'll take questions or open it up to Sarah and Steve as well.
Questions for Anna? Ms. Dunn, would you like to address the board?
So on behalf of the Fort Wayne Canal Company Board and all of the stockholders, I'd like to make
Ma'am, could you just identify yourself? Thank you.
Sarah Dunn. I'm with the firm of Alton and Green, counsel for the Fort Wayne Canal Company. On their behalf, we'd like to thank Anna for all of her hard work. Anyone making sure to express their gratitude for your support of this project and irrigating agriculture.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Dunn? Thank you very much for the long trip to Walden. Appreciate it. So, we will have action on the floor.
Yeah, I'll just say it is a real important project to the Arkansas Valley. Like Anna said, 93,000 acres and 3,000 acre feet of storage. So it have a large impact economically, environmentally, agriculturally to the area. So I think it's an important project. And if there are no further questions, I move to approve staff recommendation on both the loan and wastewater reserve fund grant.
Motion by Director Gould, second by Director Yon to move both staff recommendations. Further discussion? Call for vote. All those in favor signify by aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Let's move to agenda item number 15.
Hey, Anna Mossy, the finance staff. This is the last time you guys see me today, so I'm sort of relieved about that myself. This one is a loan request from the Public Conservancy District for the Arkansas River and Wildhorse Creek Levee Project. And I want to thank Paul Holmes, that he's the president of the Public Conservancy District Board, for making the trip up here today. So originally, the district applied for a $23 million loan, and I mentioned this briefly yesterday at our finance committee. They've spent $11 million to date. They've got $12 million going forward. And based on our cash flow issues, we're recommending a $17 million loan. So the district was formed as a result of the 1921 flood in Pueblo, and this was to provide flood protection within the district boundaries, which is really the heart of downtown Pueblo. And it's really important to the community. You can see it's a little hard to see on this map here, but back up one. A little better. It shows that the Arkansas River roughly runs through downtown Pueblo, and this protects a large portion of it. There's a lot of development in this particular area. It was built in 1976-ish, and that was well after these levees were built. And so that did take some of the pressure off the levees. The levees were constructed I think they were finished in the late 1920s. And so those did a great job protecting the downtown community. Once the reservoir was built, that helped with flood protection, but they still need the levees. Here's a shot of what it looks like if it weren't in place, what the floodplain in downtown Pueblo looks like. So this is important to the community because there's a large areas of the just an economic devastation if there was an event that happened there. And really, what happened on this particular project was after Katrina, FEMA and the Corps of Engineers started looking really hard at levees all around the country, and they came with a couple of lessons that these aren't up to our standards. Height anymore because of the construction of Pueblo Reservoir, but they had a hard time getting equipment in and trying to figure out what works best. And so they came up with over these phases of construction. So they cut the top down, created a ledge for construction access, and then replaced the lower portion of that concrete. And that's been working really well for them. So they successfully completed, I think it was over 3,000 linear feet so far. And these were funded through a $10 million bond issue plus some of the district's cash. There's no picture here. That was the second phase of construction. See, that's all the way down to the bottom of the levee and what that looks like. Then building back up, they had ASI do the construction on this. Looks like once they get that concrete laid. And so this is a little bit interesting. They collect the district collects its revenues through a maintenance fee that's authorized by state statute. Their revenues last year were about 1.1 million. They are authorized by the district court to increase their fees, so they'll go up to about 1.5 million in the future. Because they're only allowed to use that fee for maintenance on the levee. And so they also had a water bank grant application in, as well as a water reserve fund grant application in. And so those grant applications were more for some environmental improvements to the area, because they can't use their maintenance fund to do that type of work. So when staff are reviewing those applications, they felt that there just wasn't enough information on the front end for what was going to be done. They wanted more design efforts put in before construction started. And so we talked about this a little bit at lunch. We had a call with, I think, half of our staff. It was all hands on deck. Every section was represented. We got a site visit planned for next month with a lot of our staff to go down and look at this and figure out what's the best way to address this with those grant funds to help with the environmental work improvements to this. But really, because of this importance to the community and keeping these levees in place, we're still going to move forward with the loan side because that is just for the construction of that maintenance. So again, it was $23 million loan request. We're recommending $17 million in the loan.
I'm president of the board, and want to thank Anna. She's been more than helpful in this process. The fallout from Hurricane Katrina continues, and the Army Corps of Engineers would not allow our levee to be recertified. The levee is nearly 100 years old, so it could not be repaired. The toe goes about 8 to 10 feet below the surface of the Arkansas River, so total replacement is required. The levee was caused because of 1921 wiped out most of downtown Pueblo. So we are trying to replace the levee with a new levee, which we've started as 3,000 linear feet completed. The total length is about 2.8 miles. And we would certainly appreciate your consideration for the loan. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for Paul? Director McLeod.
Well, Anna explained that this maintenance fee can't be used for environmental purposes, is that what you said? But can it be used as collateral? Is that permitted? Because that's what you're offering as collateral.
Yes, we have an assessment. We have 3 tiers. The closer you are to the levee, the higher the assessment is. The farther you are from the levee, the lower the tier assessment is. We got approval from the Public District Court this summer to increase our assessment by 35%. We now receive $1.5 million in assessments annually in order to service the debt for the loan.
Any further questions? I don't believe so. Thank you for being here today. Oh, I'm sorry, Director Dole.
Well, I was just going to say, if there are any other questions, go ahead. I guess if not, I would move to approve staff recommendation on this loan.
It's been moved by Director Goebel, second by Director Dutton to move staff recommendation, agenda item 15A. Further discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you again very much, Anna, and for your time and consideration.
Thank you for coming up today, Paul. Let's move to agenda item 15B.
Thank you, Jonathan Hernandez, CWCB staff record. This is agenda item 15B. It's a loan request to the bonus ditch company for the St. Vrain diversion replacement. This project is located in Longmont, and they're seeking a loan for about $1.3 million. This will be a 30-year loan at a 2.9%. That's a blended interest rate, as most of the borrowers or most of the owners are municipal owners. Reggie Golden is the president of the ditch company. He was unable to be with us.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Reggie Golden is the president of the ditch company. He had a planned vacation to Hawaii that he didn't think he could move around for us. So in his place is Dan, and Dan is the vice president of the bonus ditch. And Barbara Brunk is also in the audience, and they're available for any questions as needed. As I mentioned, this is the bonus ditch company. We're established around 1808. Have 100 shares and 8 shareholders. At this point in time, most of their shares have been either bought or, as Longmont has continued to grow, donated to the city as part of the water right requirement when you annex the property. So right about now, Longmont owns 52% of the ditch company. Boulder County Parks and Open Space is 46%, and 2% are ag users. I will say that 100% of the land under this ditch is still used in farming. It's just that the ownership is now the municipalities. So unfortunately for this ditch company, that does mean they get our municipal interest rate. Bonus ditch diversion structures. They have two structures. One off of St. Vrain. You can see the St. Vrain Creek here, confluence with the left hand, and then they have another diversion structure off left hand creek. Straight into their ditch, or they also take water off the St. Vrain Creek. It gets put into now a pipeline because of this development, but it gets piped and it outflows right above their left hand diversion structure. And so with this system, they're able to pull from both St. Vrain and left hand creek as needed. This is the location of the diversion prior to the September 2013 flood. And this is a picture of the flood afterwards. And now the channel is primarily just in this upper reach here and no longer flows to where the diversion structure used to be located. Right now there is no diversion structure. It was destroyed by the flood. This is a photo showing where the diversion structure, again, used to be located. Misses that location comes through here. And this whole section is showing the ongoing work of the Resilient St. Vrain project that Longmont is doing of the St. Vrain Canal, or St. Vrain Creek. So speaking of Resilient St. Vrain, what this is, it's looking at the river health post-flood. What can we do? How do we restore the trail system? How do we restore the creek to a single channel, since it was the channel was wiped out? And how do we protect people, property from future flooding? And kind of what can we do to better define that 100-year floodplain? And their project is located right on the tail end of the city of Reach. So the desire of the company and of Longmont has been to fit this fix, whatever their fix is, to fit it within their overall plan of the Resilient St. Vrain project. And so that also kind of explains some of the delay into just now being able to construct the project, coming for a loan in 2017 after a 2013 flood. This just shows again kind of the new 100-year flood that that Longmont's trying to get to through their project. And again, their diversion structure sits right here at the confluence of left hand and St. Vrain. So in working with Longmont, working with the project, they identified, look here, the plan that Longmont had. What honestly, the diversion structure never really worked with Longmont's plan. And so for a long time, this has always been an issue with Longmont, trying to do some river improvements, but their diversion structures in a bad location. Diversion's not able to do what we think that. And so they found a place just downstream, and there's actually a check structure on that part of their improvements that the ditch company will more or less add onto that structure. Check structure by Longmont's roughly this aerial is 2016, so it's showing current data. So but the check structure is here, and the black line is the rough location of the existing bonus ditch pipeline that the water always went into. So what this project will do is use the check structure, an inlet structure here that will need to use a pump to be able to pump the water up into this pipeline, since they are now downstream from the existing location. The inlet structure, the pipeline, a new connection manhole, and a flow meter bulb here. There's also a sand out that's being designed as part of this, and a new sand out ditch to the river. The sand out ditch and the check structure again are being provided by Longmont. The current check structure that's still under sand out's roughly located here. This project does have a FEMA component. I guess the ditch company hopes it will have FEMA component. So what FEMA, I listed the steps here. So really the first step in getting FEMA approval is to get a project worksheet for your project. You have that done. However, the project worksheet that FEMA does first is replacing everything like for like. And for this location, that does not work. The river no longer flows where it used to flow. And even if they were to modify it, maybe widen their existing diversion where it was, it doesn't fit with Longmont's plan, the resilient St. Vrain. And so they're seeking FEMA approval for what's called an improved project. And if FEMA approves for the ditch company to improve the project, they will pay the lesser of what the improved project cost is versus what the like for like is. And so another wrinkle in this is the original like for like estimate was very low, about only $400,000. So they also first have to get FEMA to agree to the new cost estimate for like, which is around $1 million range. And so this has been an ongoing battle with FEMA. They provided the most recent documentation to FEMA, I think June, July, and they're hoping to hear from FEMA by January. And we do have a condition that I'll get at the end, but I'll bring it up now, is that, again, similar to our other emergency projects, that FEMA grant funds, if received, will be used to pay down the loan balance. So overall, the project financials, the total project is nearly $1.3 million. Hold on 1 second. I think there might be a typo there. Yeah, I have an extra line of district's costs, never mind. Putting together multiple PowerPoints, sometimes things like to jump over to other PowerPoints and you can't control them very well. So I apologize for that. Financial summary here to make sure I'm telling you correct. The total project cost is about $1.3 million. They are seeking a loan for 100% financing of that. And that'll be a loan payment of $66,000 with their 10% reserve. That's a $72,570 loan obligation. Assuming zero funding from FEMA, their existing assessment of $50 per share will be increased to $975 per share. That is quite a jump, but I do note that looking at their financials in 2014, they were able to assess $1,000 per share to handle flood repairs. So 975 is a number that they have gone to before. Obviously, they would prefer not to be there. And if they received their FEMA reimbursements, they're looking more around 500, 550 range. So that they are an average borrower. And the collateral will be the project itself, as well as the left-hand diversion head gate, since it's their primary head gate that they use, and of course their assessment revenues. And with that, I will questions of me, Dan, or Barbara.
Questions for Jonathan? Dan or Barbara, would you like? Oh, I'm sorry, Director Wells. Yeah, Dan, please come up. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dan Wolford. I'm the Vice President of the Ditch Company. We greatly appreciate this opportunity. We've been, I wouldn't say it's been a battle, but definitely an ongoing discussion of trying to version replace agricultural acres in this part of the state. And again, I thank Jonathan for all his efforts and Barbara also to get this in front of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Director Wells.
I wanted to say, I believe I recall seeing the devastation at this location on our tour after the 2013 floods. At least open space that Boulder had where the river had moved. I don't know if it happened to them twice. But I just wanted to compliment the Ditch Company for being willing to push back against FEMA. This is a common thread. Build it just like it was so it can break the same way next time. Not their fault, it's in their statute, I believe. But I just want to compliment the Ditch Company for being willing to really do something that will be better long term, and that hopefully, if such an event should ever occur, the damage will not be nearly what it was last time. So my compliments to you for that effort.
Any further questions? Director Young.
I have one question. Does this require a change of the plan diversion?
So if I me go back to this map. The decreed point of diversion for this structure is listed as a quarter section. And historically, when it was originally built, it was actually downstream. And so that's how they've since moved it up, and that's how they get both water flows, because there's no other water right users below the diversion from here to here. I did speak with Sheriff Summerford, the water commissioner here, says it sounded weird. Even further, more than 200 feet. And largely because the decree is just a quarter section, this is now actually moving the diversion a little bit closer to the historical. So she didn't.
If there's no other questions, I would move to approve staff recommendation on item 15B.
It's been moved by Director Yon, second by Director Wells to move staff recommendation, agenda item 15B. Further discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Let's move to 15C, please.
Jonathan Hernandez, CWCB staff, for the record once again. This is a loan request for the Centennial Conversion Replacement Project. They're located in Monte Vista, seeking a loan amount of $232,300. That includes lumps. It will be a 20 loan at 1.5%. That is a reduced rate because of the 20 years from a 1.75 for ag. He was planning to be here for this loan request. However, he is expecting some wet weather this weekend and needed to take his regrets that he could not be here. Emma Resorter, the executive director of the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project. She has a big part in this project, and she is here. If you have any questions for her.
I'm sorry, Jonathan, could you repeat her name?
EMNARDESOR. The borrower is a Centennial Irrigation Ditch company, not misspell Centennial here. And an interesting story is they were established in 1983. Always meeting, having annual meetings, assessments since 1883. When they came for this loan, it was the first time they really had to get their corporate books in order. And so they went to the Secretary of State, and they could not find their company. They couldn't find anything, and they're having a moment of, do we not exist? How has this happened since 1883 that we don't actually exist? Their attorney got involved. A lot of research was done, and it turned out they were searching under Centennial, the traditional spelling of the word. In 1883, when they were formed, it had an alternative spelling, I guess you call it. So this is Centennial with one N. For them, they do exist. They just weren't the name they thought they were since 1883. Anyway, they diverted off the Rio Grande. This is just east of Monte Vista. At the same location of their diversion. They also have the Heigl State Wildlife Area that's under their ditch service area. 144 shares split between 22 shareholders. This project is being completed in a similar fashion as many projects that I have taken to the board that the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration have put together. And really their aim and their mission is to create these projects that look at the river in a holistic sense. They look at water quality. They want to keep ag use in use. They want to look at riparian health, wildlife and aquatic species habitat. So rather than just replace the diversion structure and only look at that, let's look at the whole river. And let's do this in a very conscientious way. And so we have funded multiple projects similar to this, also through loans and grants. The Centennial diversion is located within the 2001 study area that the restoration project looked at. And so this follows right along with the other historic projects that have come before it. One unique thing on this ditch company is usually it's the diversion dam and head gate structure that are being replaced. Just a couple years ago, they fixed up their head gate, added automation. They paid this out of their company cash, the rates cash funds. So this project does not need to address any of their head gates or adding automation. Instead, this project focuses on the diversion dam. Here's a photo of the dam as it is, and it's really they're trying to fix. It's just the dam that's in poor condition. It's inefficient at low flows, and it's also quite a safety hazard. They still have wood links that they use to check up the river when they need to. Sometimes they'll use straw. There's stories of having to go out here to check up, and they've got a robot. They're just doing what they can to get their water. So this for safety, which would be the restoration project, is about. Also includes such things as channel shaping, stream bank restoration, construction monitoring, outreach and education, as well as administering the project. As presented, these loan funds would primarily be directed into that second task of diversion replacement. And there is a WSRF grant that you will hear tomorrow. It's for a global, it's called the 5 Ditches Project. And this ditch is one of those 5 ditches projects. And so if that is approved, then those grant funds will also be used for the diversion replacement, as well as some of the channel shaping and restoration work. This is an aerial of what they plan to build. It will be a grouted rock structure. It'll include a low flow channel. They'll put in some enhanced rock deflectors, banks, plants for bank protection. And they also will be designing a rock spill and a plunge pool to help energy dissipation downstream. And if you don't like drawings and wish you could see what this would actually look like in real life, I have that. Right here. Prairie ditch. This is upstream of Centennial. The Prairie Ditch was a very similar project, same cooperation with the Rio Grande Waters Restoration. Only for this is a Prairie Ditch company, it's their Centennial. But this is the grouted rock diversion dam that they put in, and it's been very successful. All right, I got the right financials on this slide. That's good. Project cost for this is $512,000. They're seeking a loan for $230,000, which is the $232,300 with a 1% service fee. Again, this is a reduced 1.5% ag rate for 20 years, and their annual loan obligations of almost $15,000 will be paid by an increased assessments, and it looks like they'll increase it by from $300 to about $370 to pay this off. Ratios indicate that they're an average borrower. The assessments will be the diversion dam, the project itself, and the assessment revenues. And I mentioned again, there is a pending grant for the 5 Ditches project. This grant is to the Rio Grande Headwaters Group. And of that total grant request, they've earmarked about $273,000 for this project. And with that, I will leave it to you if you have any questions of me or the borrower.
Questions for Jonathan? Emma, I'm sorry, would you like to address the board?
For that, Greg did want me to pass on his regrets that he was, oh, sorry.
Could you address or identify yourself, please?
I'm a Reeser. I'm the director of the Rio Grande Headwaters Restoration Project. And we're the project coordinator for this and helping Centennial the company out. And Greg did want me to express his regret that he wasn't able to attend. He was planning on it, but life happens. And I just wanted to thank you guys for the opportunity. The ditch company has their diversion dam right now really is not functioning, and they're unable to get the water that they need without acrobatic work in the river. So this project will allow them to not only continue their operations and in a more effective and efficient manner, but also will protect some wetlands and riparian areas in the surrounding state wildlife area. So it's a great project, and I really appreciate you guys' consideration of it.
Questions for Emma? Thank you for being here today. Director Dutton.
I would second what these guys have said. This is a really exciting project, and Greg really, really wanted to come, but they had a pretty awful second cutting, and then he's got his third cutting down, and we're supposed to get snow. So I hope you guys can understand the situation he's in today. If there aren't any other questions, I would move that we approve staff's recommendation of item 15C.
Motion by Director Dutton, second by Director Yon to move staff recommendation 15C. Further discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Let's move to 15B, please.
John, this is staff for the record. Let's hope my voice keeps being clear. 15D is a loan request to the Left-Hand Water District for their participation in Southern Water Supply Project 2. This is a project located, the pipeline will be located in Larimer and other counties. And they're seeking a loan amount of $10 million that will include the 1% service fee. And they're asking for a 10-year loan at 2.75%. That is a reduced municipal rate. Christopher Smith is the general manager of the district, and he is in the audience if you have any questions. The district's service area is shown here in red, largely between Longmont, Boulder, and Erie, kind of centered right there on that lot. It's 108 square miles, about 20,000 people, and over 7,000 houses. 2 water treatment plants. They have the Dodd water treatment plant that is, they get their CDP water through the Boulder Feeder Canal. And because that is used through the Boulder Feeder Canal, it's only a seasonal plant. It's open to October 31st. Their only year-round plant is a Spurgeon water treatment plant. They have some reservoir water that they get through from the pipeline. This is really because of the seasonal limitations of the Dodd water treatment plant. Water Supply Project 2. It's a 20.75 mile pipeline. It'll take off from Carter Lake and it'll head south. Long's Peak Water District will be the first turnout. They are one of the 3 participants in this project. The pipe will continue down to Longmont, past Longmont, to the Left-Hand Water District now, which is where Left-Hand will get their from. And they'll continue a little bit more to Boulder Reservoir, where the city of Boulder will get their water. So together, these 3 entities, Long's Peak, Left-Hand, and Boulder, are solely responsible for the cost of this project. Really, this project started with the 2002 drought. Made the district kind of reevaluate what are their source of water, what's their supply, how can they get it their constituents. They really began looking at how do we get Dodd water treatment plant to a full year-round use. There's just some risk involved in having only 1 water treatment plant during the winter. In 2005, Northern Water began looking at plans for this project, this pipeline. And in 2009, Larimer County approved the alignment of the pipeline through their county. Alternative analysis looked at for the pipeline alignment. In 2012, Boulder County approved the alignment through their county. Again, they had for the appropriate pipeline alignment. In 2015-2016, the district made improvements to their water treatment plant, increasing capacity and also providing the way for this pipeline that they're hoping to construct to be connected. And this year, 2017, they've been working on final design of the pipeline, and they are hoping to go out to bid either by December or maybe January of this winter. And construction will likely be between 2018 and 2019. So the way this project is being split up in cost is a little confusing. So it's based on their pipeline capacity. The district is getting 12 CFS of their CBT water to this pipeline, 2, and Long Peak getting 3. So at max, this pipeline will have 47 CFS flowing through it. So the improvements that need to be done at Carter Lake and Segment 1, all 3 entities are a part of that. So the costs are being split 12 out of 47, which is based on the CFS. Once Long Peak 3 CFS goes out of the pipeline, Segment 2 is now split only between Left Hand and Boulder. Left Hand is 100% responsible for their turnout, and then Left Hand will not be responsible for cost in Segment 3. This project is being managed, designed, and will be constructed by Northern Water, and they will have water allotment contracts with Northern Water. Those are still being finalized this fall, but those water allotment contracts will finalize exactly how those costs are split. Some of the questions are, maybe we take, since Left Hand is 10.8 million roughly, and the project is 43.9, maybe we'll just take that percentage, apply it to every single part of the project, regardless if Left Hand's necessarily in that or not. But that will be decided by the water allotment contracts. So the financial summary, the total project cost, the current estimate, I should say, that Northern has put out is $43,809,000. Of that, the district's cost is $10,735,000. And so they're seeking a loan for us to include a service fee of $10 million. And that will essentially pay for 100%, and anything above the 10 million will be paid by the district in cash. And again, the 43 and the 10 million are still estimates. They have not received bids for these. Of course, they have hope that Northern is conservative on their estimate, and their whole portion will be less than 10 million. But again, anything more than 10, they know they cannot get that, so they will cash funding those portions. Their interest rate is they're seeking a 20-year term, which is a 2.75% interest rate. Again, there's a reduction because of the term. And their total annual loan obligation is $722,000. Their current revenues that they're receiving will pay for this debt obligation. So right now, they don't see that they necessarily have to increase water rates. But of course, the collateral is revenues, essentially that they will raise them if they need to. And the ratios indicate that they're an average borrower. With that, I will open it to the board if you have questions of me or the borrower.
Questions for Jonathan? Chris, would you like to address the board?
Chris Smith, General Manager for Left Hand Water District. First, I'd like to thank staff for all the help they've given us getting this project application through to here. And then in advance, I appreciate the board's consideration of our loan and the project. I guess just sitting here and watching the timeline, it's kind of surprising that now pipelines can take as long as building like a major reservoir. That some of the lighting and alignment issues that you run through when crossing a lot of open space and Boulder County specifically can add that kind of uncertainty to a really demanding project. Flood in 2013 really brought to light for the city of Boulder and Left Hand and the need for this project. There's the CBT for a period of time through the end of the irrigation season, some damage to the canal. And so the redundancy of this project, in addition to allowing year-round use, is critical for the water district to be able to meet its demands. So that's all I had to say. And on behalf of the board, again, thank you for consideration of the project.
Thank you. Any questions for Chris? Again, thanks for making the trip to Walden.
Thank you very much.
And Director Young.
Multi-entity project. So I think it's exactly what we're here for. So with that, I would move staff recommendation on item 15D.
It's been moved by Director Young, second by Director Wells to move staff recommendation 15D. Further discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That concludes our items on 15. Let's move to agenda item number 16.
He's going to be right after me. Okay, I'm going to move this. All right, thank you and good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the board. For the record, I'm Megan Holcomb, CWCB staff. I'll be presenting agenda item 16, water plan implementation update. Along with me is Mr. Blaine Evans, and he's going to step up to provide us with a little implementation vignette for the McFarland Reservoir. I'm going to pull up our story map in a minute, but I'll just get started. So this November, we reached the 2-year anniversary of the CWCB board voting to approve Colorado's water plan with a unanimous vote. This 2-year milestone offers a chance to reflect, celebrate, focus, and look forward to challenges ahead. Reflecting requires us to take pause, to look back at our incredible statewide collective efforts that brought about this plan, to look back at what's working and what's not working. It's easy to get moving on the next thing before we celebrate our successes, especially the small ones. Celebrating past successes is more than just a feel-good act. I think it recognition at all levels really ignites glue to help motivate stakeholders and even just by association, carry us forward to the next achievements. So in an ongoing effort to track our state's progress toward achieving the objective goals of the water plan, CWCB staff wants to take the next few months around this anniversary to both celebrate how far we've come and measure how far we have to go. So staff has created an immersive and publicly available story map that can support just that. It's a live and up-to-date implementation progress. It's on the web, so we're trying to pull it up. But it's benefit of being on the web is that you can access it at any time. It's mobile friendly, so you can even pull it up right now on your phone. But this story map helps us highlight both small and large wins from all corners of the state, from all sectors, and helps us recognize projects and efforts that really help us close the gap on those implementation objectives. I could type it in the, can we type it in? Oh, that's the editing side. We don't want them to be able to edit it. As you can see, it's on the homepage of ColoradoWaterPlan.com. You can go right here and it pulls up. It's an ArcGIS platform, so it pulls up the story map here. No, it's okay. I'll show them just a few examples. I'm not going to walk through the whole thing today because that would take a long time, and really just want to give you an idea of why we created this. The idea behind this story map is that, one, we can add to and update as we go. So as projects are either in action or have been completed and really bring us closer to meeting those goals, we can add that to this documentation that is live for the public, for our use, to really see how far we're going, and we can continually just track that publicly. I'm sure we can all acknowledge that the objectives that we've sought out, the progress is not going to happen in an easy, stepwise manner. It's going to be big, early gains can happen, and other objectives may take longer to ramp up towards. So that's why this incremental recognition, really recognizing small and large projects along the way, can really be important to communicating that this is not just a plan that's sitting on the shelf, but this is constantly in our minds and in our actions. So I'm not going to walk through the whole thing, but I do want to scroll through a little bit. So if this is helpful here. So if this looks familiar to you, Director Mitchell did walk through this story map at the Colorado Water Congress. If it looks familiar because you've already checked it on your own, awesome. So basically, this is just one long storyboard, and you can scroll through, and there's a little intro here, but really the meat of this story on this highlights. And here we've sectioned it out to each objective in the water plan. And so, for example, for supply and demand gaps, we can really highlight what was the goal that we set out and where are we at? What are some examples of implementation that have really started us down this path? So we have some examples from the WSRF, kind of the really tangible numbers that we have behind progress. We have some examples in storage, or we've got conservation and land use. Like programs that are ongoing, some are more of those hard numbers, but really it's so easy to instantly add to this, which is the beauty of having something more than a PowerPoint that is stagnant as a snapshot in time. This is a live feed. So really what you see here is the backbone, kind of a framework and a point for communicating our state's path toward meeting these goals. And just a reminder that we have no independent PR or marketing staff at CWCB. And I say that because I think it's a reminder that it's all of staff, all of our board responsibility to really communicate what's happening to achieve these objectives right now, what's coming down the pipeline, and really celebrating what's already been done. Starting today and at board meetings following in the future, staff will be bringing in more people, more Evans here. And by that, I mean standout projects, local examples of implementation that are happening wherever we are. So going, most likely, you guys passed McFarland Reservoir coming up from 125, but Mr. Evans is here to give us a more detailed update of where that project's at. Would you like to introduce yourself? Can you come on up here? Special microphone. You have the floor.
Thank you.
Before we start, Dr. Evans, I'd like to give you a little bit of background. Dr. Evans and his family are truly outstanding assets to our community, and we are very fortunate to have them here. Blaine, if you'd like to introduce yourself, then we can kind of get started, if that's all right with you.
Well, I'm Blaine Evans. Give you a little report on the McFarland Reservoir project. That dam is Evans Land Company and Fish and Wildlife Service, 50% each. You probably, we applied for a grant and received one a couple of years ago, so you probably know or remember a little on that. The reservoir is an old reservoir. It's got a absolute decree for 6,503 acre feet from 1910. It's the second reservoir in priority in our basin. It also has a conditional decree for 6,833 feet. The construction on it was finished somewhere around 1915, and the old blueprints estimated the cost of it then was to build was around $10,000.
furnishes irrigation water for 12 to 1,500 acres of land jointly on both Evans Land and Fish and Wildlife. I have built 4 ponds since we've owned the ranch that trap additional tailwater off the irrigation, mainly for stock water, but also benefits wildlife and migratory birds. Our reservoir was sonogrammed a few years ago, and it had decreased probably 500 acre feet from the original decree. And so with this project, we had enough freeboard on the reservoir to raise the spillway to recapture that lost storage capacity. The project, as you probably remember, involves slip lining the outlet tube, putting in new tow drains. One portion of the dam never did have any tow drains in. It'll have a new head gate and new staff gauge to monitor for sure how much is in the reservoir. It's an important migratory birds, especially the white pelicans. There's 500 to 1,000, maybe more, that nest on islands on each year. And going back to the increased storage, of course, we usually carry over quite a large percentage of the water, 30 to 50%, and it kind of helps drought-proof our outfit, but helps stream flows on down the drainage. It's I think this storage is very important to the North Platte and Colorado's water plans to just got a few pictures here. This is on the backside of the south end of the dam where they've got tow drains laid and haven't filled back in yet. And this is one of the tow drains here, the end of it, where they'll tie in, come out for discharge. Special grade of sand is put around the pipe and then gravel on top. And I approached them to see if they didn't need a fabric filter over that, but they assured me that the slits in that tow drain pipe that they're putting in is more than adequate to keep silt from going in. And this is just some of the old tow drains here that were tore out. That's working on the tow drains underneath the reservoir. Same site. That's just a picture of the reservoir when it's pretty well drained. There's probably another foot to go out of it there. That's another one working on the tow drains. That's looking downstream where we've got some stock topsoil stockpiled, and they've got to mitigate some wetlands. The wetlands were made by the reservoir over on the north end, That being there, putting toe drains in. That's a riser coming up out of the unfinished toe drain. This will be all sloped back in there. Up probably 1 to 2 foot of that riser will be sticking out of that roof. I think we're going backwards. Maybe that's it. Thought there was one more picture on there. Of the spillway. Pretty well done. Spillway, they kind of got it pretty well done to start with, and it's kind of overkill what I would think. Anyway, I'm giving you a little update there. I hope they can kind of gear up here. They're behind schedule. They've got to line the tubes yet, and hopefully they get that done. There's a little water in the river, so we can maybe get a little refill. And our big turn is all factors below that is depending on this. Sounds like they're going to have another crew in here.
And Blaine, if you could hold on for just a second, I think Director Mitchell's has a question or two.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. So when do you recall when you received a WSRF grant?
That was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
That money has 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
But if they don't need it, it'll go back. If there's an overrun on that use fund, it'll be the last.
Thank you. And I just wanted to make a comment as I'm here listening to Blaine. It really highlights the importance of where the work is happening on the ground by people like this. At CWCB, we're doing a lot of the facilitation and initiating projects and documenting and helping them along. But it's important to recognize that so much of the work happens on the ground in places like this. And I do think that McFarland Reservoir makes a big difference to the area, and it's a critical piece of North Platte's program and how they're moving forward. So this is an example project, and all the other board members, you need to know that when we get to your basins, we're hoping to highlight important projects in your own basins as we're highlighting in the North Platte. And I think there's a huge support for this project, and it's been critical to moving the basin implementation plan, the North Platte Basin implementation plan forward. So I wanted to personally thank you for helping us implement Colorado's water plan. That's important for us to hear also.
Any further questions for Dr. Evans? Well, thank you, Blake. Appreciate it very much. Megan? We have a wrap-up.
Yeah, that's really all we had was highlighting that presentation. So,
Any questions for Megan? Director Goebel.
Yeah, Megan, thank you, and thank you. I guess Dr. Evans' presentation. I missed it, Megan, but the storyboard, I appreciate that. It's kind of nice to track the implementation of the water plan, but are you looking for, or where do you get these numbers from? I know Ben Wade is our Arkansas Basin, and he's asked at a few rental meetings if there's any implementation numbers or projects or stories that you want to share. Get them to Megan. Do you also get them from like monthly reports or final reports off of grants, or what other ways can we get these?
A great question. Thank you. Yes, we were going around the round tables to really ask because we can only highlight what we're aware of. And of course, this is not all implementation is happening at the state level. So there's a lot that we would like to be more aware of. But we have the implementation update that happens, and a lot of information gathered from that from all sections at CWCB. So this is not just coming from water supply. We also have the 6-month progress reports on all WSRF. Reports. So all progress reports that come in, we try and look at those and find numbers, as well as those final deliverables. And there's, I know that Mara's been sent a few emails. We put an initial call out for send us your success stories, and we've had a few people email with what projects they're working on. And so it really is kind of a grassroots collection effort, but we definitely at CWCB have those important deliverables that we check in and log. Yeah.
Any other questions for Megan? Well, thank you. Great presentations. We are scheduled for a break. Let's at about 5 after 3. We have split comment, and we will be on agenda item number 17. at this moment in time, Mr. Eric Sutherland.
Eric Sutherland, I am a citizen of Laramie County in the city of Fort Collins. I'm here just to remind this board that we do have a constitution in the state of Colorado. A constitution that has 3 provisions that were disregarded in making the loan to the Box Elder Stormwater Authority several years ago, despite protests from people who thing was corrupt. It was nothing more than a giveaway to property speculators that wish to have their property taken out of the floodplain and leave 1,000 people on the hook to pay a $10 million loan. Now, if somebody who has not been appointed to this board signed a promissory note for $10 million, people be obligated to repay. That is exactly what happened with the Box Elder Stormwater Authority. Ken Sampley, who was presumed to be the time, had never been appointed by the Fort Collins City Council, had no governmental authority in Section 4 for keeping track. I like to say that the Box Elder Stormwater Authority is like a greatest example, greatest learning opportunity in public finance law, because it's really hard to find a public finance law that was not violated, whether or not it was the city of Fort Collins violating its own city charter to pay the debts and obligations of private entities, or the town of Timbus abuse of Urban Renewal Authority property tax increment to pay its quote-unquote share, completely in violation of the URA statutes. Constitutional provisions that we're talking about here. Article 11, Section 6, which prescribes the creation of debt, except for circumstances, and the Tabor Amendment, which requires voter approval in advance for the creation of public debt. Both would be applicable to this situation. Both were completely disregarded by the staff of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Now, you really think that 1,000 people, $10 million debt hanging over their head, should not take action to enforce their constitutional rights? Sure, they should. Now, of course, James Eklund and Tim Feehan, the 2 directors that were responsible for getting this loan done, they're not here anymore, right? They make a mess, then they leave. Tim Feehan told me on the phone one time, he did not care if that $10 million loan got repaid. That is not the legislative intent of the loan fund. That is not why that money is made available to this organization to loan out, so that you can make bad loans. Might as well, right now, just start making plans to go ask the General Assembly for an appropriation to write down that debt. There's no way this is going to stand up in court. People protested. People said, don't make this loan. You did it anyways. And now you got to pay tune. Now, there are opinion letters that were issued, part of your policy. Click those up. Someone that has any substance, because the only law firm that has enough money to pay could heck rock. Their opinion letter is less than conclusive about the legal opinion that they offered to validate this loan. So good luck chasing them down for the money when you lose it. When government screws up, it can really screw up. It seems to be that it screws up really bad. And this is such a situation. That project was not worth doing. If there were stormwater requirements, stormwater needs in the Box Elder Basin, they could have been approached several different ways. Let me give you just an idea how bad this whole thing is. Since your main meeting, just the tip of the iceberg of this thing, which was an amendment to the repayment terms of the Box Elder loan. Some contractors for the Box Elder Authority, just contractors, not people in decision-making authority, sent in an invoice. I think it was somewhere between $700 and $800. Property owner of a farm that had been condemned and destroyed to build this useless stormwater facility. That's to entertain the question about whether or not the farmer could graze some stock on the property. You know, that's the kind of pork barrel largesse spending that accompanied this entire project. You know, it's just, you know, some things aren't worth financing, guys. Some things really do require a gut check. Is it really necessary to charge fees involuntarily, left people to pay for some things. This was one of those things. So I hope it's all a lesson to everybody in this room. There are times you screw up. People say, ask you not to, and you go ahead and do it anyways. Well, it's probably better not to in this situation. It was only took me a few minutes to raise enough money to get the lawsuit into court. I don't know why I haven't gotten it done yet, except there's another litigation that's related to this that I'm involved with. But it's going to come your way. And at the end of the day, you got nothing else to say except for the fact, well, we probably should have read the 4 pages of legal objections that I presented to this board prior to its approving the final loan for the box elder. It probably should never have dispersed the funds to build something nobody needs except for a couple of people that are just rejoicing right now because they got rich. They threw the loan onto what appears to be the taxpayers of the state of Colorado. So I do appreciate the taxpayers of the state of Colorado for giving me this opportunity to speak to you this evening, but I really don't have a whole lot of appreciation for this organization, its staff, or its inattentiveness. Honest people when they come forward. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. I believe at this point in time, we will move to agenda item number 17, statewide water supply initiative. Mr. Greg Johnson. Well, just let him go.
Greg Johnson, CWCB staff. I have a fairly brief update on the statewide water supply initiative this time. We are moving forward, as you well know. We had talked about this at the last meeting in July. I just wanted to make sure that you were in the loop of where things are at with the process right now. As Rebecca Mitchell, our Director Mitchell, had mentioned during the director's report this morning, we do have the documents posted up on the website for the technical advisory groups of the different methodology documentation that we have that we discussed at the July board meeting. So those are on the web. We have a separate web page for just the SWASI update that can get you through the water management tab on the website. So everything's available there. We were a few days late in getting those out. We were shooting for the end of July. At this time, we ended up sending those out on August 3rd. And then had requested public comments from the TAG participants by the 11th of September. And that was primarily to get feedback in enough time before the TAG meetings to really prepare and kind of know, where we were headed, whether we were on track, whether the comments were, making sure that we were on base, missing data sources, things like that. So we have gotten a number of comments, which is great. It's at this point still the minority of the participants, but it's a whole lot of really good substantive comments that really kind of range the whole spectrum from very, very much in some of the details, some of the weeds of what we're doing, some of the modeling work to, very high level, better understanding scenario planning, better understanding especially how this fits with the basin roundtable process, and in particular with the basin planning process, which I think is an ongoing educational effort, especially this time around with the update to the statewide water supply initiative, since things are so different this time around. So a lot of great comments. We are working through those with the technical team, and we have those meetings next week. So that's really when we will know how well we may or may not be, really kind of meeting those expectations with the project as scoped. Again, a lot of those comments are indicating that we seem to be off on the right foot, but of course there will be some fine tuning. We will respond to every single comment. Have not done so yet. We're in the process of cataloging those. In October, after the meetings, we will respond to the comments with a summary matrix similar to the water plan, where we have all of the comments, individual comments from each person, the organization, and then our response. And of course, we will respond, but not necessarily be able to address and incorporate all of those comments. Some of them are, of course, diametrically opposed. Many of them indicate great efforts that we could do, if we had the resources with this particular project. Hopefully, many of these recommendations you'll be able to address, at a more local level through the base implementation plans. So those meetings are scheduled again for next week. It's Monday through Wednesday. On Monday, we have the planning scenarios technical advisory group meeting. Tuesday, we've got the municipal and self-supply industrial. And then on Wednesday, we have both the agriculture, and the environmental and recreational as well. Those are all going to be held in the Denver West office complex. It's where Brown and Caldwell, who was one of our contractors on this project, has their office in a different building than their actual office, but a larger conference room. We are anticipating fairly good attendance. So far, I actually sent out we sent out the notice, but then also the actual invite to try and keep tabs on who plans to attend. About half of the members have responded to that. It's hard to know if people are using that in their calendar system or not. So I think we'll have a very good attendance and robust discussion there. With the roundtable process, so as we had discussed at the July board meeting, this is really our public outreach component to get this project off on the right foot. So we're doing so, of course, through these tag groups, through a representative peer review process. The roundtables have been notified of this, have been working with this process for the last few months. For many months, we've discussed, how this is structured, how it's coming, that it is more of a fatal flaw review, going through these methodologies to better understand where we're headed, if there are missing data sources, things like that. All of the roundtables have taken kind of their own approach to this, their own kind of local interpretation. Some have had, additional discussions offline. Some are really working with the roundtables to discuss this. For example, I was up at the Yampa White Green Roundtable last week. They had requested that I go up to discuss things a little bit more and explain the process and some of the methodologies. On a similar note, the Arkansas Basin Roundtable has a panel discussion scheduled for their meeting in October that I will be participating in as well. So there's a number of different venues for this discussion that are out there. So the Director Wattenberg, do you have
questions for Greg? I think we're pretty good. Great. Thanks.
Great.
Appreciate it. All right, let's move to agenda item number 18.
All right, good afternoon. For the record, Eric Sky, Interstate Federal and Water Information Section. I'll be presenting agenda item 18. Whenever our projector decides to warm up and work for me here. All right. So this is a damaging high groundwater response grant for the Highway 144 Ranchettes Homeowners Association. In the audience with us today, we have Mark and Peggy Kokesh. They're representing the Homeowners Association. So to get started a little bit, just to orient you on where this project is going to be located, the Highway 144 Ranchettes are located just northwest of Fort Morgan, 144. You can see they're just south of where the Bijou Creek and the South Platte meet here. And they've also got the Fort Morgan Canal running through this little project area, and the Bijou Canal is a little further south down there. So their high groundwater issues really began back in 2009. There was some basement flooding, and a lot of the residents had to begin to install sump pumps. They also began to maintain a seep ditch on a property that's north of the Homeowners Association. This was working for a little while and kind of stabilized the issue until around 2015. The water had begun flowing into the seep ditch enough that they couldn't continue to maintain it. It was starting to erode the sides of the ditch. It was sloughing off and basically negating any of the work that they had done previously. So the landowner who owns the seep ditch denied permissions to continue to maintain that seep ditch, and the problem has begun to worsen since then. Things came to a head really in 2017. One of the residents, actually Mr. Kokesh, had to install 2 more sump pumps into his basement in order to keep the water through there. The water table had also risen to a point where it's starting to mix with the leach fields in the area. So we're getting to a point where their drinking water supply is mixing with the leach fields. He gave Director Stolp a call, and Stolp went out there and took a visit. And after a little bit of guidance, he hired Hydrokinetics in order to design a dewatering solution. up with is a primarily passive system here. What we're looking at is this little red line is the perforated tile line here. So it's going to be buried about 14 feet below the ground surface. According to the modeling done by hydrokinetics, it's going to flow at about 200 gallons per minute for the first 30 days, and then it'll ratchet down to about 150 gallons per minute through this little perforated line. So you'll notice this little collection vault here. The gradient in this is flat enough that they actually needed a collection vault. After all this water has passively gone through the tile line, they need to pump that somewhere. So there's this collection vault here, where it will then be pumped into this blue line. This is going to be a 6-inch HDPE PVC pipe that runs all the way up here, drainage area. So in order to get that water out of there, they have to pump it up to about 5 feet below the ground surface in some areas. Through here, they actually do need to do some directional boring. There's a little bit of a hill here, so that's going to have to be directionally bored about 12 feet below ground surface, and then it'll have to be directionally bored underneath Highway 144 here. So once all is said and done and this is installed, the hydrokinetics modeling shows they can actually lower this water table down to 2, maybe 2.5 feet below the lowest basement. This will bring the water table well below a 4-foot buffer between the leach fields and where the water table is actually going to be sitting. The total request for the grant today is going to be $133,000, 746. They do bring a match of $39,359.50, which is a 23% match. The criterion guidelines for this specific funding requires a 10% match, so they more than exceed that. An interesting thing I'd like to point out about the budget here is that the applicant did go out to bid on this project. They received around 6 or 7 bids for the project, and so this is really representative of the best price that they could get. So with that, we're going to take a gander at all the different criterion guideline application shenanigans. This is everyone's favorite slide because of all the text. The only thing that is currently pending as far as our criterion guidelines is this permitting requirements here. So CDOT requires a special use permit in order to bore underneath Highway 144. They actually can't get that until they have their contractor in place. So that's the only thing that they're missing in terms of our requirements. So with that, staff recommendation is that the board approve this damaging high groundwater response grant for $133,746, conditional on the necessary permits being obtained. With that being said, I'm available. Mark and Peggy Cash are also available for any questions you may have.
Any questions for Eric at this time? Mark or Peggy, would you like to address the board?
First of all, I'm Mark Kokash, and I do represent the Fort Morgan Highway 144 Ranchettes Homeowner Association. Basically, what I would like to say to the CWCB is thank you. You know, oftentimes you don't get to hear the good things that happen out in the field, and I was so appreciative, and my wife could probably echo that as well, to have somebody like John Stoll coming and spending time with us, and actually having the empathy saying, you know what, we think we can figure something out. You need to do A, B, and C. It was nice to have that kind of guidance. And then to be given the guidance with Eric and then having Jimmy on. They came out to our house. They took a look. And we've had a number of people look at this. And so, again, CWCB, thank you for at least coming out and spending time with us and seeing what needs to be done. So I do appreciate it. And we thank you for your consideration.
Please, Mark. Any questions for Mark from board members? I don't think so, but thank you very much for coming along. We truly appreciate it. Very on.
Thanks for coming up, Mark and Peggy. Getting up, and thanks for all your work on this, Eric. And appreciate it. So, just so you know, Mark and Peggy have done a lot of work on this on their own, installing that Lower South Platte Water Services District install some monitoring wells, but they had to go through and monitor them and case them, and so they've done a lot of work on their own to figure this out. And what I really appreciate is that, you know, they have an issue and they're willing Not unlike the Pawnee Ridge subdivision in Sterling, where they have some high groundwater, they take the bull by the horns and they get something done and they have a plan. So I really appreciate that. So with all that said, I would move staff recommendation on item 18.
It's been moved by Director Young, second by Director Wells to move staff recommendation, agenda item number 18. Further discussion? Call for the vote. All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Let's move on to agenda item number 19. Warren Riss. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Lauren Riss. I'm the Assistant Director for Water, and this is agenda item 19. What I'd like to do is provide the board a pretty high-level overview of the NISP project, the Northern Integrated Supply Project, kind of where we are in the permitting process, how the state fits into that, and then I'm going to give Northern Water the honor of presenting the full mitigation plan and the additional project details to the board. They're the ones that really did the hard work on this. I can do the dummy that can make you gotta use the computer. Oh. What button did you press? Oh, okay. You press the back button to go forward. Yeah. Okay, so as many of you are well aware, the Northern Integrated Supply Project is a proposed water storage and distribution project that will supply 15 Northern Front Range water providers with 40,000 acre-feet of firm yield water. The project will consist of 2 off-channel reservoirs, Glade and Galeton, a 4-bay reservoir, 3 pump plants, pipelines to deliver water for exchange with 2 irrigation companies, improvements to an existing canal to divert water off the Cougar River near the canyon mouth. Glade Reservoir, as you can see on the map here, hopefully you can see, will be located northwest of Fort Collins, just near the intersection of Highway 287 and Highway 14. It will be about 5 miles long, about 260 feet deep, and have the capacity to store 170,000 acre feet. Water to the Glade will be diverted from the Cougar River during mostly high flow times, and the major component of this project will be that it requires the relocation of Highway 287 to the east. Yellowstone Reservoir will be located east of Alt and northeast of Greeley. It will store about 600 acre feet of water at full capacity, and the water to Gallatin will be diverted from the South Platte River downstream of Greeley. So I just want to pause here and talk about the nexus of this project to the water plan, because of course almost everything we do these days has to do with the water plan. As you all know, the water plan has the goal of identifying 400,000 additional acre feet of storage statewide, and if you do the math, which I run out of fingers to count, but this project takes a big chunk out of that goal. And I think it's important to recognize, of course, this project predates the water plan by a good decade or so, but it's very important to achieving that goal nonetheless. Also want to highlight the conservation portion of what's on here. 13 out of the 15 participants that will benefit from the project have a water conservation plan. Water efficiency has been reviewed and approved by this board. The other 2 entities are in the process of developing plans. Since 1988, the NISP participants have collectively reduced water use by approximately 22%. And then just one other point related to the water plan that I wanted to point out. Through this process with CPW that I'll talk about here in a minute, we already put into practice one of the recommendations that came out of the lean process that was recommended in the water plan, and that was to coordinate between CDPHE and CPW early on in this 122.2 mitigation process. And that happened through our discussions with Northern Water. We brought CDPHE in when we got to the subject of water quality, and CDPHE will do that in turn when they take up the water quality permitting portion. So just to orient you as to where we are in the whole permitting process picture here, the draft EIS was released for public comment in 2008.
But back in August of 2004, that's when the U.S. Army Corps officially began the EIS process. Then was released in 2008. In February 2009, the Corps announced they would move forward with a supplemental draft EIS to include additional studies concerning hydraulic and modeling. That supplemental was then released in June of 2015 for public comment. The Corps is currently working on completing the final EIS with the estimate of completing that probably in early 2018, though as we know that's kind of a fluid process. CDPHE then be undertaking the Section 401 water quality certification process, which I described will result in bringing in CPW for that conversation as well. Then finally, we expect or hope, I guess, that the final 404 permit ROD is in 2018. So that's how I feel when I read the statute books. So this is I think the most pertinent language that I put on the slide, although it goes on for several paragraphs. Basically, to summarize, the General Assembly has cleared through 3760 122.2 that the General Assembly has declared that it's the responsibility of the state for fish and wildlife resources that are found in and around state waters that are affected by construction, operation, or maintenance of water diversion, delivery, or storage projects, and that they should be mitigated by private applicants to the extent and in a manner that is economically reasonable and maintains a balance between the development of the state's water resources and the protection of the state's fish and wildlife resources. The applicant is required to first submit a mitigation proposal to the CPW Commission. And if that proposal is approved, then it will be transmitted to the CWCB board, which can either adopt or modify that agreement, at which point that mitigation plan becomes the official state position with respect to mitigation. The intent then is that that state position will be communicated to federal or state or other governmental agencies where the applicant must obtain a permit. And that will inform that process at that point. The board is, well, most of the board I think is fairly familiar with this process and their role, having recently gone through this with Windy Gap and Moffett in 2011 and then Chatfield in 2014. But I did want to pause here and ask Laura Chartrand if there's anything she wants to cover with regard to the CWCB's role in this mitigation approval process or anything else that I missed.
I did provide a copy of the statute in its entirety. You're not like me, and you really like to read the statutes and what they say. I think you did a great job covering it. I would just probably reinforce the process piece is that it comes to you from CPW, and that CPW has done an extensive heavy lift in working with Northern around this. And as Lauren indicated, your role really is to either affirm or make modifications. If you do make modifications, those modifications get sent on to the governor, and it's up to the governor to decide what the final state position is. So that's the extent of your authority. I will say that this also binds the CWCB for projects that the mitigation cost more than 5% of the project cost. And so that's in play here. So if Northern comes before you as an applicant for a mitigation plan grant, then you are, the language in the statute is that you shall provide that grant to the applicant. So just something to keep in mind. And what is at your discretion is if the applicant were to become before you for an enhancement grant.
Great, thank you, Laura. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the process that we were involved in with Northern Water and with CPW. Listed on the slide there are the folks that were involved from the DNR side. Ken K. Meyer was the ringleader in all of this. He was introduced earlier this morning. Pete Konovitz, Ty Petersburg, Janet George, and then Amy Moyer and myself from DNR, and then Carlin Armstrong was the latest and greatest addition to the process, who will be taking over from Ken once he retires later this month.
So if you can read the final there, timeline scale, because between the first green dot and the second green dot was a 2-year period that involved regular twice monthly meetings with Northern Water and CPW, and a lot of good discussion. I feel really good about how that process went. I'm really proud of the product that came out of that and the discussions that we had. I think CPW pushed Northern pretty hard to get to where we are today. But Northern also, I think, went above and beyond what was required of them in the process, and the conversations were really amicable and productive. So in October 2015, we first started those discussions, and then in May, this summer of 2017, CPW first presented the potential fish and wildlife impacts to the CPW Commission. And then in June, Northern Water presented their fish and wildlife mitigation plan to the Commission. And then in June of 2017, also Northern Water hosted an open house, a public open house in Loveland in Larimer County. CPW was present and talked to the public, anyone who was interested in learning more about the plan. CPW staff presented their assessment of the proposed plan to the Commission. And then after some additional conversation and negotiation with Northern Water, the Commission voted unanimously to support the mitigation plan at its meeting September 7th in Steamboat. And that brings us to today. As I said, I'm going to really let Northern Water talk about the nuts and bolts of the mitigation plan, but just to summarize, it ended up in $53 million worth of mitigation that includes measures to mitigate direct impacts and enhancement measures that go beyond the mitigation requirements. So I know Eric Wilkinson is here. I'll ask if there are any questions from the board first, and then I'll hand it off to Northern.
Thank you. This is for Laura. You alarmed me when you directed our attention to 2B, mandatory funding of grant requests. So, and I've been studying it a bit, and it may be that when Eric presents this will all kind of work itself out. And this, please don't consider my remarks to be in any way in opposition to what's happening here. I've always asked the same question: what's this going to cost? When and what money are we setting aside to prepare ourselves for it? That's all I'm asking. Is, if we can answer any of that at this point, I'd like to know that.
So one point to highlight, the statutory requirement is if mitigation costs go above 5% of the total project costs. My understanding, and Laura can correct me if I'm wrong, that is limited to the mitigation component of the project and not enhancement. And so the dollar figure that puts us at today is $43 million. The total project costs, I believe, are about $860 million. Is that about right, guys? So again, math is not my strong suit, but I don't believe that's quite 5%. So those figures, I think, could change, as we move forward with mitigation. But I think we come in just under that 5% for now.
And I'd also point out that there's a limitation on the amount of grant that the board would be bound to issue. So that grant could not exceed 5% of the total construction cost of the project.
Any further questions for Lauren before we move on?
Okay, then I'll ask. Mr. Wilkinson, come on.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Eric Wilkinson, General Manager of Northern Water. We very much appreciate the opportunity and the honor to appear before the board today for your consideration of a fish and wildlife mitigation plan. First of all, I want to start out by thanking everybody that has been involved in this, from representatives from DNR, Amy and Lauren, and also for several years from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Ken Kamar specifically, slave driver, and everyone from the Colorado Water Conservation Board that has supported this project over the years. I'm just here to make the introduction. Our project manager, Carl Brower, will make the presentation of the Fish and Wildlife Plan because he's better than I am. But again, we very much appreciate your consideration of this. I just want to notice a couple of things today before I sit down. Today is a special day for Northern Water. It was 80 years ago today that by decree of Willow County District Court, Northern Water was created. So today's our 80th birthday. It's an honor to work for an organization that's been around 80 years, successfully around 80 years. And you've been around 80 years, but you're just a little bit older than we are because you were created a few months before us. So in 1937. Also, last time I was in this room, it was much smaller than it is right now. The other important significance of this room was this was the room as well in 2011 that we brought to you as the municipal subdistrict, our fish and wildlife mitigation plan for the Windy Gap Fermi project. So there's a little bit of history going on here. Again, I'm going to turn this over to Carl, and again, it's always a pleasure and an honor to appear before the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Thank you.
For that presentation, Eric. It's always a privilege and a pleasure to see you also. So thank you.
It's very rare when I actually have to lower a microphone from the previous speaker. So, and I do realize I'm probably be the last person between you and beverage hour. So I'll try to get through this. Thank you for having us up here. This is one of my favorite places in the world, the North Park. So what a wonderful drive, and glad to be up here. So Lauren has already gave a lot of the highlights of the project, and so we can kind of cruise through some of this presentation. I'm going to give kind of the 30,000. However, I do have the plan along. I'm not sure. Do they have the plan too? Oh, so we can get into chapter and verse if you like. No. But we're going to go through kind of the main parts of it. Am I the first one to do that? So as Becky mentioned, and I always make sure I start out with this project or these presentations by saying this is a participant-driven project. It's being done on behalf of 15 water providers in northern Colorado. The president, the participant committee is here, Chris Smith, but it really encompasses most of Northern's boundaries, with the exception of some of the larger cities that are in the Windy Gap project. This is the new water supply, 40,000 acre feet of new reliable yield for these folks. About the project, some of the key elements, Glade Reservoir Complex, and that is kind of what you hear most about, the 170,000 acre feet of that. And it's about half the project yield. But also there's the South Platte Conservation Project I'm going to talk a little bit about too, and it's kind of the unsung hero. It's a partnership with AG, and it provides about half the project yield as well. Together, 860 million. I was doing the math as well when I heard the grant thing. I thought, well, that's nifty. And then it's exactly 5%. But we are absolutely willing to they're great projects, and I know folks want to be a part of that. So if you want to take those, expand upon them, we'd be happy to on that. All the material is on site. 30 million cubic yards. So that's 18,000 acre feet of earth that we're going to have to move. So it's not dirt. In the valley there, I'm told by our engineers, we have good fat clay. Apparently good fat clay is better than skinny clay. So, you know, we have a good project and a good location for it. 35,000 horsepower pump station up in there, and I'll show you a slide in a minute that'll make it more clear. And then we do have to relocate Highway 287. If you're going 287 from LaPorte, Fort Collins up to Laramie, the Haystack Rock, it sits right in the middle of this reservoir. I tend to think it will probably be a dive site in the future. So that's layout. Let's see. So we have the forebay, the Poudre Valley Canal. When you're going into the Poudre Canyon, it's the first canal that you come to. We would enlarge it. It would flow into a forebay, and then from there it gets lifted up with a pump station up into Glades. So we may be looking at some energy recovery opportunities as well. We're hoping to do that. On the other hand, right now we're trying to keep it out of the FERC, not make this a FERC-centric project. We've been in the permitting long enough, I think. The conservation project would pump water from the South Platte River just downstream of the confluence of the Poudre, and would pump water to a new reservoir called Gailton. It would sit just north of Highway 14. If you're going from Alt out to Sterling, the big diagonal up there, yeah, you know exactly where it is, where the windbreaks are, just up the valley from the windbreaks. It's not quite as intensive to bring people out there. Blade, there's the button, there's a button, but there's actually a pretty good valley there for a storage vessel, and that 4,000 acre feet. We would then do an exchange with that water in partnership with Lerner Weld and the new cash companies, releasing about 25,000 acre feet from Gailton to those companies, and that would be about 1/5 of the water that they presently take. And we would then exchange that into Glades, so kind of the other half of the water right. So permitting status, obviously we're here today to talk about the Fish and Wildlife Mitigation Plan. Lerner County, we're working through with some site-specific impacts, particularly related to some of the conveyance elements of the project and also the recreation. The final EIS. Golly, I can't wait. I was very young when this started. I was very young when this started. Fairly young. It's been going on for a long time, since 2004. Actually, we've been working on this, I think, since the late 90s is when we coined the project phrase. From that, one certification, so that'll be the next big state process on the water quality. And then hopefully after that, the record of decision, either around late 2018, early 2019, and then we're off to the races. Right now, we are working on the design of Glade Reservoir. Actually, we just kicked off the design elements as well for Gailton. Highway 287 pre-design is underway in concert with CDOT. CDOT ultimately will be a CDOT project that we fund. We're not in the highway business and willing to do that. It's a nifty project for them because it's what we call a greenfield site. You know, meaning you're not trying to expand something that's already there. No traffic control to just go. Glade construction would start in 2020. Glade would be online in 2025, and the conservation project portion in 2027. So, I think Lauren through most of this when we start the draft EIS, so I'll skip this, but we're here for the yellow part here today to go through this the state's Fish and Wildlife Mitigation Plan. It is important to note that this will be incorporated then into the final EIS and then into the record of decision. So these are permit requirements that would then go into be adopted by the Corps of Engineers as well. Lauren talked about this too, where we've been through this summer, where we are after 2 very, I think, good years of kind of enjoyable discussions, occasionally a little strong-arming, but occasionally he wondered if I was having a good day or a bad day, and likewise, so it was okay. I learned a lot. Hopefully they learned a lot as well. I learned a lot about, the environment, that the important things to them. They certainly learned a lot about our water project. So today I'm going to really just hit on the things that come up in yellow here. They're the kind of the key cornerstones. There's probably 50 or more different commitments that we've made, but I'm going to hit on the main ones. So for stream flow, it's been the conveyance refinement, the peak flow mitigation, stream channel. We're going to make sure that the stream that presently goes dry, that we have a way to get water around the existing structures, and we make those fish friendly. So suddenly we're going to have an area that fish can migrate back and forth through the area that we're going to enhance. Specific terrestrial really has been focused on kind of the glade area, and particularly the area west of glade. There's elk herd there, and kind of making up for the habitat we're flooding out, and on top of that, also adding to the habitat. So a big thing that I think really kind of changed the tone on this whole project has been this conveyance, what we call conveyance refinement, which is an awful engineering way of looking at it. It's kind of what we engineers, how we name things. We can name it the Kmeyer conveyance. And I joke, and I should be somewhat serious on that, because we talk about how long we've been working on this, but I recall a long time ago having coffee with, I believe it was Mr. Carlson and Mr. Kmeyer at a coffee shop in Loveland, talking about what is it that the state would want, and Ken kind of expressed his ideas, particularly for that base flow, and really, he wants to make it better for his kids and grandkids than it is today. And I think we took that to heart, maybe a little slowly at first, but that picked up steam. And after the supplemental draft EIS, we came up with this conveyance that not only was going to be, your typical engineered pipelines, but using the river as the conduit for some of that water as well, and committing to the water being in there 24/7. Where right now, this is a river that through that particular stretch has a lot of diversion structures, and it goes dry a good chunk of the year. Now a live stream year round, and 14,000 acre feet of water. So I know, folks come in and talk to you about dedication of this and that, but 14,000 acre feet, that's a lot of water to be dedicating to the stream in a reliable manner. It does, as I said, it eliminates the dry up points, provides the base flow. It came at a cost. It was about $25 or more million to make that happen, because, and as what we've talked about, and when I've talked with some colleagues too, we're engineering outside of optimum now. Optimum would be just putting the pipeline in and you're good to go. This is engineering outside of optimum, but for the environment, this is a huge benefit. And, to get these projects going, this is what we have to do. And we've gone a little outside of optimum, but it's going to work. It gets us a vested interest in the water quality of that river now, because we're going to drink it. This is going directly into our pipeline system. We want that high quality, so that's a big deal. And here are some of the metrics. Generally, we're going to make sure that the minimum flow typically is never going to fall below 20 CFS. Typically, it's in the 25 to 35 CFS. A lot of these metrics are in the mitigation plan, but the point being that middle one, percent of days with flow below 1 CFS below Lerman well, right now, 64% of the days it is, which means 36% of the time it's less. There's nothing. We're going to make it go to there's 100% of flow all the time there. And 18 CFS during the winter, 25 CFS during the summertime. Peak flow operations. This has been the one that, if anything, got us a little looking at each other a little bit. It's been this one. So because, okay, you want us to bypass the water that is going to go into this project in a big way. Volumes that we're talking about of 2,800 CFS. But we went back to our calculators, went to our modelers and said, okay, if we do this plan, will we lose yield? And we found if we went with this, what we call a tiered approach, depending on the storage and glade, depending on what type of year, because if, say 2011, we're good, fat, and happy in glade, it's a great flow year, that's the type of year, okay, we let 3 days go by. Just stop our diversion. Then we get into these other tiers that when things aren't as good, you know, how much do we let go? You know, is it 2 days? Is it 2,800? Is it 1,200? And all those metrics really came from Parks and Wildlife staff and the work that's been done on the EIS. So, you know, it wasn't just throwing darts. It was really based on science of what are the flows, what is it going to take, with the primary purpose being we're getting those sediments to move around for the fishery. That's the big thing. These are not the channel forming flows, and these are the flows that are advantageous for spawning habitats for the fish, particularly trout. So on this slide here, for 1 day, right now we have about 2,800 CFS on a 3-year reoccurrence interval at the canyon mouth. And really with our project, with this flow, we're not going to change that much at all. It's going to remain about at 3. For 3 days of that happening, we do double that. It goes from a little over 3 days to 7 years. But at some of the other flows that do work on the stream, with this, we're basically doing, there's no harm now. So there's been a lot that has gone into that program. That was, I think, over the past 6 months particularly, that's probably been the biggest thing that we've interacted with CPW on to get to a final point. And it worked. The final, kind of the leg of the tripod here, is protecting land to the west side of Glade Reservoir. So Northern owns additional land above and beyond what we need for the reservoir, so we're going to dedicate that with a conservation easement for the elk habitat. We're going to buy additional lands above and beyond what we need for the reservoir. And then all of that pink area there, that's state land board land. And I've learned a lot about state land board now that things I didn't know. They look at it, it's money for the children, I get that, and that's good. However, kind of the highest and best use, and that may be something different than protecting it. So we're going to work with CPW, likely Fort Collins, likely Larimer County, to see if, and then GOCO, and see if we can use some of the area that we've already said we're going to maintain, use as matching, and see if we can protect most, if not all, of that land in the future. It's to our benefit because I think it continues to maintain high water quality as opposed to having a whole bunch of subdivisions up through there. It's certainly for the environmental habitat, you know, a big plus. So the process, I think, has worked. As painful as it has been, as long as it's been, as expensive as it's been, it's really forced us to take a look at things differently. I will be the first to admit that in this project up until a few years ago, I looked at mitigation as purely how do you make things go to even? Not really how can I make them better? And I think that's really the change. think that's actually a good thing. It's good for our project. It's going to maintain. It's going to be good for the environment, and hopefully, it is what gets us over the hurdle and gets us a final permit. We've spent $18 million on all the studies. We're ready to spend money on the actual stuff now. Some of the top environmental consultants, I think, especially like geomorphology, I think in the nation, have been involved in this. It's been, particularly a result of working with Lauren, Ken, and all their staff about twice a month for the past 2 years, just sitting down. We're going to tackle this topic today. Sometimes we got through it. Sometimes we had to come back to it. There's been some really interesting ones. I'll let duck hunting, but that's an inside joke. But yes, there will be duck hunting allowed at Glade. We've talked about paddleboard duck hunting, perhaps, but that's another discussion. But they've been good discussions, and I think one thing I've learned through this process is it is an example where if you do sit down with a party with no preconceived notions and say, what can we do? And just pledge to, okay, we're going to work through this and we're going to keep our cools. And I think we came up with a absolutely great plan. And it will result ultimately in a better Poudre River. Right now you have a Poudre. It's a great river. I love that river. But that river goes dry through Fort Collins, and that river is no longer going to go dry. So we feel like everything that we've done here, the peak flow, those first two things, the thing that hasn't been mentioned, we came out with 2 weeks ago at the Parks and Wildlife Commission with an endorsement of the plan by TU. We were surprised, but we listened there too. There were even things in August, ramping of the peak flows and all of that we said, yeah, we can do that. And so I think the fact that an organization like that has actually got on board as well, I'm just thrilled with. So it does put, we are going to have an enduring commitment to that river. We're on it. We're going to be a diverter. And we want that water to be of the highest quality. We have environmental commitments that seem to last for a very, very, very long time. Children, grandchildren. But basically, we're part of the river now. And whether that's being part of the Watershed Coalition out there, if there are future events that happen that impact the river, future fires and whatnot, I mean, we definitely have a vested interest now in being part of that. So we're there. All of that, while we've still been somehow, we're getting kind of close, but we're cutting it close, but we are able to maintain our 40,000 acre foot project yield. So that's been the guiding principle through all of this. So with that, yeah, if you want to call us, that's fine, but Ken's the better one. But I will say again, it's been a privilege working with these folks. It's been enjoyable. People have had children during this time. People have gotten married. Yeah, 2 people have gotten married on our team. So it's been good. And I would be happy to answer any questions you have of me. Not yet. Okay.
Any questions for Carl? Do we have any questions for Carl from the board? I don't believe so. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just a couple things. Director George, I consulted with my esteemed colleagues in the finance section, and I am assured that we have $1.5 million set aside in the construction fund through the project's bill if and when someone were to take advantage of their statutory right.
Director George.
We don't know the timing, so there's probably no urgency here. I take it these dollars would be much later down the road. I think the applicant has to spend the first X, which is 5% of the total, before our obligation kicks in. And then like we're committed for that next 5%. But I don't know how much that would be by that time. It could be tens of millions of dollars if it happened. But it's looking at your pricing of mitigation that you showed us here, I counted 29 million. We don't get caught until it's 43 million. My numbers about right? If that's the case, it would have to be something very odd.
Right. So, so 5% of the total project cost for the mitigation side of things works out to about 43 million.
Right. And you've priced that as much as you can at this point, something much less than that. Am I right? You had the two figures up there of 24.5 million for conveyance refinement, 4.5 million for WAF mitigation. That's all that you had.
Yeah, there's actually within the plan kind of a sum total of everything that lays out piece by piece. The total mitigation is right at 43 million right now. That's our present estimate. So that works out to right at $5 million or 5%. Both the mitigation cost, but also the project cost. Just don't say that, look at me that way, but it will go likely up. But I would guess because they're mainly construction related things, they'll probably go up proportionally. Yeah.
Okay, I understand. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, if I might, I wanted to just ask Ken Kmeyer if there's anything he'd like to say to the board. This is his last time being involved in one of these processes, and he and Becky, I think, really set this process up from scratch. So I just wanted to, don't hit me, Ken, but give you the opportunity if you choose to take it.
Sure.
Most appropriate. Thank you.
Board, my name is Ken Kmeyer. I'm the senior aquatic biologist for the Platte River Basin with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And yes, this has been a very long process. I've been working on water projects for over 10 years now. Your Director Mitchell, and I sort of are the ones that set this whole process up with the Windy Gap and Moffett projects. So she deserves a lot of this credit as well. Becky worked with us through 3 of the projects, and all of those were successful. I actually did one by myself this time, Becky, so I think it's okay. And to reply to Mr. Wilkinson's calling me a slave driver, I think that's better than Director Wells may remember. Dave Little called me a nagger during the Moffett project, so I think it's a step up to be a nagger from being a nagger. What I would say is this has been a huge collaborative effort. Cannot require any of this. This is all discussions and collaboration with Northern Water and their participants to put this plan in place. And I left our commission 2 weeks ago with this sort of analogy. I think anybody could sit down and argue an individual point on this mitigation plan, but when you put it together as a package, we haven't put together a better one in all the projects I've been working on. So thank you to Northern for that process. Thanks to this board for your considerations, and hopefully the Pooter, I'm very confident that the Pooter will be a better river because it'll have water 24/7, 365. It'll have the ability for fish to move up and down the river longitudinally that they don't have right now because of retrofitting some diversion structures that we haven't seen before. So there's a lot of things that the river's going to become more positive in that situation, that if I ever have grandkids, maybe they will fish there. So I'd take, if there's any questions from the board, I'd be willing to answer.
Questions for Ken. Director Randall.
Thank you. I don't have a question, I have a comment. Ken, I just want to thank you for your diligence and your leadership in working through this. Your statement in recognition of the parameters of your participation here. You don't have a regulatory role, but rather the ability to get things done by working with people. And I just want to commend you for that. And thank you for your 31.5 years service to Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the people of the state of Colorado. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Randall.
All right. Any other questions of Lauren?
If not, this is an action item, and the staff's recommendation is that the board approve the Fish and Wildlife Mitigation and Enhancement Plan without modification.
Director Yon.
It's a great thing, and it's a great thing that an engineer like Carl to box. So, yeah, that's right. I hear you. So with that, I'd like to move to approve this item 19, the staff recommendation on item 19.
It's been moved by Director Yon, second by Director Wells, to move staff recommendation, agenda item 19. Further discussion? Director Wells.
I'd like to comment a bit about the process. First of all, Ken has gone from a nagger to a slave driver, and that's progress. But mostly there's a great deal of progress in this process. The Northern and Denver Water went through kind of together, and it was the first time the commission had actually had to undertake such a process. So Becky and Ken and others kind of had to invent a process. The commission wasn't sure if it needed to have public meetings. It wasn't sure what its role was. No one was sure what the parameters should be. And we did manage to come up with 2 great plans. And they were very well received. They were very useful in the federal regulatory process. But there were some hiccups that we have addressed actually in the state water plan. One of the primary ones was having gone through the Fish and Wildlife Mitigation and Enhancement Plan process and having an official state position on fish and wildlife enhancement, and then getting to the 401 certification and having someone at the Water Quality Control Division decide that water was too cold for fish, whereas the fish biologists at CPW disagreed. So it is in the plan, in the state water plan, that we should try to decide on a lead state agency on a certain subject matter. And as far as I'm concerned, fish belong to CPW. And so having the division involved early on so they can express concerns that they have before it's 5 years later. So I think that's a great benefit. I think the process worked much better this time. And I think the results prove the fact that the process is much better. Everyone's smarter about it. And it seems to me that the result is really amazing. And using the proveder to develop the river is just brilliant. Really, really helpful. So good job.
Further discussion? Hearing none, call for the vote. All those in favor signify by an aye. Opposed? Motion carries. At this point in time, we have ended our agenda items. We will be in recess shortly. I believe there's some activities planned for 5:30 in the adjoining room for directors and staff. Director George. With that, we are recessed until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, Thursday, September 21st.